The gratitude of callers is the gratitude of slaves. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the Terran vessel Just Ledger. Before her, the void glittered with the light of the cradle net. A system of fledgling human worlds. The enemy was not a warship, but a legal document, a binding tithe enforced by the imperious Gilded Compact. We came to this star to witness, not to fight. Her mission was to observe the Compact's gratitude harvest from the colony on Aurora Nova. The stakes were the freedom of 3 million souls and the precedent that would echo through this quadrant of the galaxy. Rostova knew this would end not in plasma, but in a public inquiry that would burn brighter than any star. The Compact's methods relied on the quiet acceptance of their authority. Humanity, however, had learned to make its arguments loud. A quiet chime indicated the presence of Ledger's integrated fleet mind, a consciousness woven into the ship's very frame. Commander, the AI's voice was a calm cascade of synthesized tones. The Gilded Compact vessel Golden Rule has acknowledged our presence. They transmit their standard welcome and a copy of the Aurora Nova Gratitude Mandate. It paused its immense processing power, sifting through trillions of lines of legal code. The mandate is predatory. It leverages their initial aid package into a perpetual servitude clause. Rostova's jaw tightened. She had read the preliminary reports, but seeing the official text made her blood run cold. Their game was usury on a civilizational scale. The Gilded Compact were masters of the fine print, their empire built on contracts no one could afford to break. They did not conquer with fleets, they conquered with clauses. Her first officer, Lieutenant Jian Li, stepped forward, her face a mask of professional calm. They are hailing us directly, Commander. Ambassador Valerius of the Compact wishes to extend a personal greeting. Rostova nodded, her gaze fixed on the swirling nebula outside the viewport. On screen, Lieutenant. Let's hear what the wolf has to say. The image of a tall, willowy being appeared. Ambassador Valerius was elegance made manifest, his robes shimmering like liquid gold. His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. Commander Rostova, an unexpected pleasure. We trust you are here to observe the mutual prosperity fostered by the Compact's benevolent guidance. Rostova met his gaze without flinching. This was the first move in a game she could not afford to lose. The law was their weapon, and she intended to turn it back on them. We will show them the true cost of their benevolence. Ambassador Rostova replied, her voice. Even we are here under the Interstellar Witness Mandate. We observe, we record, and we ensure all agreements are honored in both letter and spirit. Valerius's smile was a predatory slash. Of course, the Compact has nothing to hide. We are merely collecting what is owed, a small token of gratitude for saving this world from famine and plague. He gestured dismissively. A simple tithe. Surely your people understand the concept of debt. Rostova's mind flashed to the reports. The tithe was 80% of Aurora Nova's gross planetary product for the next 500 years. It was a death sentence delivered on gilded parchment. Their system was built on a lie, a carefully constructed illusion of fairness. A debt of gratitude should never be a chain. Before the first orbital tribunal convened, a child on Aurora Nova sketched a picture in the dust. It showed a towering golden figure handing a loaf of bread to a small stick-figure family. But from the family's necks, long chains led back to the golden figure's hand. The child did not know the complexities of interstellar law. They only knew the weight of the collar they could feel but not see. Rostova ended the transmission with a curt nod. Ledger, she said, turning to the empty air where the AI's presence was felt most strongly, begin a full-spectrum audit of the Gratitude Mandate. Cross-reference every clause with the foundational charters of the Galactic Concord. I want to know every loophole, every contradiction, every instance where their benevolence shades into extortion. The ship hummed with activity as the AI complied. Its logic flows were a river of pure, cold reason. The Gilded Compact's law was a fortress, but every fortress had a flaw. She would find it, or she would make one. The public inquiry would demand nothing less than absolute proof. Justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. Lieutenant Lee approached her data slate glowing with fresh intelligence. Commander, we're receiving encrypted signals from the surface. Resistance cells. They want to share their records, first-hand accounts of the Compact's benevolence. Rostova considered this. Direct contact was a risk, a potential violation of their observer status. But the testimony of the colonists was a weapon the Compact could not easily counter. The truth had a power that transcended legal maneuvering. Open a secure channel, Lieutenant. Let's hear what the people of Aurora Nova have to say. This was the pivot. The inquiry would not just be about contracts, it would be about lives. The Compact had counted their profits, but they had not counted the cost to their reputation. That was about to change. We will hold a mirror up to their actions. The first testimony was from a farmer named Anya Petrova. Her voice cracked with emotion, filled the command deck. She spoke of the Compact's arrival, the ships like golden gods descending from the heavens. They brought medicine, food, and technology that saved millions from a devastating plague. We were so grateful, she whispered, her voice a ghost in the machine. We would have given them anything. Then came the contracts presented as formalities. The colonists, desperate and trusting, signed them without question. Now their children worked the fields not for themselves, but for the distant, unseen masters of the Gilded Compact. The gratitude they felt had been weaponized against them. Their salvation had become their damnation. Rostova listened, her heart a cold, hard knot in her chest. This was the human cost, the story behind the sterile legal language of the mandate. The Gilded Compact did not trade in goods or services, they traded in hope, and they had cornered the market. She looked at the faces of her crew, saw the same quiet fury reflected in their eyes. They were Terrans. They had a long and bloody history with chains. The Compact had mistaken their restraint for weakness. That was a fatal miscalculation. They will learn that a ledger remembers every debt. Ledger. Rostova commanded, her voice ringing with newfound resolve. Analyze the Compact's energy grid. Find the source of the power they use to enforce this mandate. I want to know how they maintain their technological superiority over Aurora Nova. The AI responded instantly, its processors diving into the complex energy matrix of the system. The Compact utilizes a network of orbital power relays, Commander. They draw energy directly from the system's star and beam it down to their surface installations. Rostova saw the opening, the flaw in the fortress. The Compact's power was centralized, a single point of failure. It was a vulnerability they had overlooked, blinded by their own arrogance. Power that can be given can also be taken away. The plan began to form in her mind, a daring gambit that went beyond legal challenges. It was a move that would force the Compact's hand, expose their methods to the entire galaxy. Lieutenant Lee, prepare a message for Ambassador Valerius. Inform him that we have discovered a discrepancy in the energy distribution network. Suggest that a joint inquiry is necessary to ensure the safety and stability of the system. The message was a carefully crafted trap baited with the Compact's own rhetoric. They could not refuse a request for a joint inquiry without raising suspicion. They were caught in their own web of feigned benevolence. The corridor of law was about to become a very narrow passage. Valerius's response was predictably condescending. He agreed to the inquiry, but on his terms. The meeting would take place aboard the Golden Rule in a chamber designed to intimidate and overawe. Rostova accepted without hesitation. The location did not matter. What mattered was the audience. The inquiry would be broadcast live, a condition she had insisted upon under the witness mandate. The entire Cradle Net would be watching. The Compact thought they controlled the narrative. They were about to learn that the truth was not so easily contained. The court of public opinion was now in session. As Rostova prepared to board the shuttle, she paused to look at the image of Aurora Nova on the main screen. A world of breathtaking beauty, its continents swirling with green and blue. A world of 3 million souls, their futures hanging in the balance. This was more than a legal dispute. It was a fight for the very definition of freedom. The Gilded Compact believed that power gave them the right to exploit the weak. Humanity had a different creed. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. We do not break chains only to forge new ones. She would remind the galaxy of that simple, unyielding truth. On the shuttle ride over the civilian vignettes scrolled across a secondary screen, a constant reminder of the stakes. A teacher described how her school's funding was diverted to meet the tithe, her students learning from outdated texts. A doctor spoke of rationing essential medicines, making impossible choices about who would live and who would die. Each story was a single thread in a tapestry of systematic oppression. The Compact's gratitude tax was not just a line item in a budget. It was a slow, grinding process of immiseration. Their system was a parasite draining the lifeblood of its host. The ledger of their crimes was long and detailed. The inquiry chamber was a masterpiece of Gilded Compact design. Gold filigree climbed the walls, and a single massive chandelier of what looked like captured starlight hung from the ceiling. Ambassador Valerius sat on a raised dais flanked by his legal advisors. He projected an aura of absolute confidence. He believed he had already won. Commander Rostova, he began, his voice echoing in the cavernous room, we are here to address your concerns about our energy grid. Please enlighten us. The trap was set. Now it was time to spring it. Rostova stood tall, her simple Terran uniform a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. She would not be intimidated. She had the truth on her side. And the truth was a weapon that could shatter even the most gilded cage. Ambassador Rostova began, her voice calm and steady. Our analysis has revealed that the power relays you use to supply your surface operations are also capable of being used as a weapon. A murmur went through the assembled observers. Valerius's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. An interesting theory, Commander, but pure speculation. The Compact is here to help, not to harm. Rostova pressed her advantage. Then you will have no objection to a full independent diagnostic of the relay network to ensure there are no potential malfunctions. The demand was a logical extension of her initial premise. To refuse would be an admission of guilt. Valerius was trapped. He had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. The public inquiry had begun, and he was already on the defensive. The ambassador, recovering his composure, gave a magnanimous wave of his hand. Of course. We have nothing to hide. Our technicians will cooperate fully with yours. It was a bluff, a calculated risk. He was betting that his technology was too complex, too advanced for the Terrans to decipher. He was wrong. The Just Ledger was more than just a ship. It was a key. Its AI could unlock any system, decipher any code. This was not a battle of technology, but a battle of wills. And Rostova's will was forged in the fires of a history that had taught her the price of freedom. A mirror does not lie, and she would show them their own reflection. Back on the ledger, the AI was already at work, its digital tendrils probing the compact's network. The code was intricate, a labyrinth of security protocols and encrypted firewalls. But the AI was relentless, its logic unassailable. It found what Rostova was looking for, a hidden subroutine, a command protocol that could turn the power relays into a planetary-scale directed energy weapon. The benevolent saviors had a gun to the head of Aurora Nova, a final unspoken threat to ensure compliance. The mask of civility had slipped, revealing the ugly truth beneath. They were not shepherds. They were extortionists. Their gratitude was a collar, and now everyone could see the chain. The next day, in the full glare of the public inquiry, Rostova presented her findings. She did not use inflammatory language. She simply showed the data, the lines of code, the schematics of the weaponized grid. The evidence was irrefutable, a cold, hard spike of truth driven into the heart of the compact's narrative. Valerius's face was a mask of fury. His carefully constructed composure shattered. He tried to deny it, to dismiss it as a fabrication, but the data spoke for itself. The audience, the entire Cradle Net, saw the deception for what it was. The compact's reputation was unraveling thread by painful thread. The cost of their arrogance was a debt they could never repay. A market vendor on Aurora Nova watched the broadcast on a flickering public screen. For years, he had paid his tithe, his profits dwindling, his hopes fading. He saw the compact ambassador squirming under the Terran commander's calm, relentless questioning. A spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time flickered within him, hope. He looked at his daughter, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. Maybe, just maybe, she would grow up in a world without a golden chain around her neck. The inquiry was a disaster for the Gilded Compact. Their carefully crafted image of benevolent overlords was in ruins, but they were not yet defeated. Valerius, cornered and desperate, played his final card. He invoked the sanctity of contract, the most sacred law in the galaxy. The agreement with Aurora Nova, he argued, was signed willingly. It was a binding legal document, regardless of the circumstances. He was technically correct. The law was on his side. But Rostova was not playing his game anymore. She was about to introduce a new variable into the equation, a concept the compact had long forgotten: justice. A ledger must be balanced one way or another. The contract is valid, Rostova conceded, and a wave of shock rippled through the gallery. Valerius allowed himself a triumphant smirk. He had won. The Terran commander had overplayed her hand, but Rostova was not finished. However, she continued, her voice cutting through the silence. The Concord also has laws against coercion and duress. A contract signed under the threat of extinction is no contract at all. She turned to the main screen where the image of the weaponized power grid still glowed. The people of Aurora Nova signed your agreement because they had no other choice. You held a gun to their heads, and now you claim they shook your hand willingly. The moral force of her argument was undeniable. She had reframed the debate, moving it from the narrow confines of contract law to the broader arena of universal rights. The escalation was a masterstroke. She had used the compact's own legal framework against them, forcing them to confront the ethical bankruptcy of their position. The ambassador was speechless, his legal arguments turning to dust in his mouth. He had built his case on a foundation of lies, and now the entire structure was collapsing around him. The inquiry, it was no longer about a single contract. It was about the very soul of the Gilded Compact. They had sold their integrity for profit, and now the bill was coming due. The mirror of justice reflects all flaws. Ledger Rostova's voice was a quiet command transmitted through her private comms. The time has come. I want a full system-scale cost analysis. Calculate the total value extracted from Aurora Nova under the Gratitude Mandate. Then calculate the actual cost of the aid provided by the compact, with a generous margin for profit. The AI began its work, its calculations flowing with the speed of light. The numbers that appeared on Rostova's private data slate were staggering. The compact had recouped their initial investment 1,000 times over. The rest was pure, unadulterated exploitation. The public ledger was about to get a significant update. Armed with this new data, Rostova delivered her final argument. She laid out the numbers, the cold, hard facts of the compact's greed. She showed the assembled galaxy the vast chasm between what the colonists owed and what the compact had taken. "This is not a tithe," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "This is theft on a planetary scale. It is a violation not only of conquered law, but of every principle of decency and fairness." She then proposed a solution, one that was both radical and brilliantly simple: a mirror ledger, a system to return the costs. Justice, she argued, was not about punishment. It was about balance. The idea was revolutionary. The compact's assets within the cradle net, their trading posts, their energy credits would be garnished. The funds would be transferred to a public ledger managed by a neutral third party. From that ledger, Aurora Nova would be repaid every credit that had been unjustly taken from them. The process would be transparent, the accounting meticulous. The compact would not be destroyed, but they would be made to pay their debts. It was a form of justice the galaxy had never seen before, not the justice of the sword, but the justice of the spreadsheet. The count would be exact, and the receipts would be public. An elder on a distant colony. A world that had its own burdensome contract with the compact watched the proceedings with tears in his eyes. He had long ago given up hope of ever being free, but now he saw a new path forward. The Terran commander had shown them that the law could be a shield for the weak, not just a sword for the strong. He gathered his own council. They would file their own petition, their own request for a mirror ledger. A single act of courage had ignited a fire of hope across the stars. Valerius was apoplectic. "This is an outrage, an illegal seizure of our assets." "The compact will not stand for it," he blustered. But his threats were empty. The tide of public opinion had turned decisively against him. The Concord, seeing the will of the galaxy, had no choice but to sanction Rostova's plan. The Aurora Nova Gratitude Mandate was to be audited, its profits returned. The precedent was set. The era of the Gilded Compact's unchallenged economic dominance was over. They had built their empire on the fine print, but they had forgotten the headline, "Humanity does not bow to tyrants whether they carry whips or contracts." We teach by numbers, and the lesson is always fair play. The first transaction appeared on the public ledger a few hours later. A transfer of 1 trillion energy credits from the Gilded Compact's accounts to the Aurora Nova Restoration Fund. The entry blinked a single line of text that represented a monumental shift in galactic power. It was a victory not of arms, but of ideals. Rostova watched the confirmation on the main screen of the Just Ledger. She felt no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction. The work was not done. The compact would not take this defeat lying down. But for today, on this one world, justice had been served. The ledger was balanced. The first cost of victory was the illusion of peace. The compact would now view humanity as an active threat, a rival to be undermined and eventually broken. A new colder war had just begun. Her second officer, a stoic tactical analyst named Corbin, approached her side. "Commander, long-range sensors are detecting a buildup of compact military assets on the edge of the cradle net. They're not overtly hostile, but it's a clear show of force." Rostova nodded, her gaze distant. "They're reminding us they still have teeth, that their power isn't just in their ledgers." She had won the legal battle, but the larger struggle was far from over. The Gilded Compact's wealth was vast, and their influence reached into the highest echelons of the galactic concord. They would seek revenge not through open warfare, but through subterfuge, through political maneuvering, through 1,000 small cuts designed to bleed humanity dry. This victory had cost them the element of surprise. They could no longer pretend to be simple observers. Ledger Rostova said, turning her attention back to the AI. Begin contingency planning. Model all potential compact responses, economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, proxy conflicts. I want a full spectrum analysis of our vulnerabilities. The ship's systems word processing the new, more dangerous reality. The AI's voice returned calm as ever, but with a new edge of seriousness. Modeling complete, Commander. The probabilities are concerning. The Compact's capacity for retaliatory action is substantial. Rostova looked at the grim projections, the branching paths of potential futures, each one fraught with peril. The price of justice was eternal vigilance. This was the second cost, a future of constant draining conflict. A peace that was really just a pause between battles fought in boardrooms and back alleys instead of open space. The news of the Aurora Nova decision spread like wildfire. On dozens of worlds, subjugated races began to stir, inspired by humanity's example. Petitions flooded the Concord, demanding similar audits, similar mirror ledgers. The Gilded Compact's economic empire, built over centuries, was beginning to crumble at the edges. They had become a symbol of galactic exploitation, their name a byword for greed. But an empire does not die quietly. It thrashes, it rages, it unleashes all its fury on those who dare to challenge it. Humanity had painted a target on its own back. They had chosen to be the mirror, and the reflection they showed the Compact was one the elder race could not tolerate. Their pride demanded a reckoning. A young legal aide on the capital world of the Concord reviewed the influx of petitions. Her office, once a quiet backwater of interstellar bureaucracy, was now the epicenter of a galactic legal revolution. She worked 18 hours a day, fueled by stimulants and a fierce sense of purpose. She was of a species long considered timid and unassuming, a people who had endured the Compact's condescending benevolence for generations. The Terrans had changed everything. They had shown her that the law could be a tool for liberation. She felt a kinship with the distant humans, a sense of shared purpose that transcended the vast emptiness of space. Her people would be next to demand an accounting. Rostova stood before the viewport, watching the Golden Rule turn and slip away into the void, a wounded predator retreating to its lair. She knew this was not an ending, but a beginning. The fight for Aurora Nova was just the first battle in a much longer war. A war for the soul of the galaxy, a war against the quiet tyranny of the collar. She thought of the child's drawing in the dust, the simple, powerful image of the chains hidden in a gift. That was the image she would carry with her into the battles to come. A reminder of what they were fighting for and what they were fighting against. Humanity's greatest strength was not its technology or its warships, but its unyielding belief that some things are not for sale. Freedom was at the top of that list. The ledger of history would remember this day. Lieutenant Lee, Rostova said, her voice soft but firm. Set a course for the Citadel. The Concord has summoned us to a full tribunal. It seems our mirror ledger proposal has ruffled some feathers. Jian Li's expression was grim. The Compact has powerful friends, Commander. This will be a fight on their home ground. Rostova allowed a small, determined smile. Let them come. We have the truth, and we have the receipts. The Just Ledger altered its vector, its engines glowing with a steady, unwavering light, as it moved toward the heart of galactic power. The ship was a vessel of law, a bastion of reason, in a galaxy too often ruled by force. It carried the hopes of millions a single point of light, pushing back against an encroaching darkness. The cost of victory was high, but the price of submission was infinitely higher. The journey to the Citadel was tense. The Ledger moved through established shipping lanes, a lone Terran vessel, in a sea of commerce controlled largely by compact-aligned corporations. They were shadowed, scanned, and subtly harassed at every turn. It was a war of nerves, a campaign of intimidation designed to break their resolve before they even reached the tribunal. Corbin, the tactical officer, was on constant alert, his fingers hovering over the defense grid controls. "They're testing us, Commander," he reported, his voice tight. "Probing our shields, scanning for weaknesses. They want us to flinch to make a mistake." Rostova remained calm. "Let them look. We have nothing to hide. Our strength isn't in our shields, it's in our cause." She refused to be baited. The Compact's methods were predictable, the tactics of a bully who had never had anyone stand up to them before. They would learn that humanity did not flinch easily. We count every provocation, and every count is an entry in the book of their transgressions. During a quiet moment on the bridge, the AI spoke its synthesized voice, holding a note of something almost like curiosity. "Commander, my analysis indicates that the Compact's legal framework is internally consistent, yet produces outcomes that your moral code defines as unjust. This is a logical paradox." Rostova considered the AI's words. It was a machine of pure logic, struggling to reconcile the difference between what was legal and what was right. "The law is a tool, Ledger," she explained. "It can be used to build a house or to break one. The Compact uses it as a hammer to crush their opposition. We use it as a level to build a foundation of fairness." This was the core of their philosophy, the principle that guided their actions. A system that serves only the powerful is not a system of justice. It is a system of control. The AI processed this, its internal models shifting and recalibrating. It was learning, evolving, coming to understand the uniquely human concept of righteous defiance. The Citadel was a breathtaking sight, a Dyson swarm of interconnected habitats and official structures orbiting a brilliant white star. It was the political and legal center of the galaxy, a place where fortunes were made and empires were humbled. As the Just Ledger approached, it was directed to a secondary docking bay, a subtle but clear insult. They were being treated not as witnesses, but as defendants. The Compact's influence was everywhere. Rostova knew the tribunal would be an uphill battle. They were walking into the lion's den armed with nothing but the law and their own conviction. But sometimes that was enough. The brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows. She intended to shine a very bright light indeed. Ambassador Valerius was waiting for them in the grand hall of the conquered tribunal. He was no longer the smug, confident diplomat she had faced on the Golden Rule. His face was gaunt, his eyes burning with a cold fire. He had been publicly humiliated, his career and his reputation in tatters. This was his chance for revenge. "Commander Rostova," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "You have made a grave error. You have mistaken a commercial dispute for a crusade. The Concord does not appreciate such theatrics." Rostova met his gaze without flinching. "When commerce requires chains, Ambassador, a crusade is the only moral response." The battle lines were drawn. This would not be a dispassionate legal debate. It would be a clash of civilizations, a fight for the future of the galaxy. A junior administrator from a client species of the Compact watched the confrontation from a distance. He had always admired the Gilded Compact's efficiency and power. He saw the Terrans as disruptive, idealistic fools who didn't understand how the galaxy truly worked. But as he listened to their commander's simple, direct statement, a seed of doubt was planted in his mind. What if the Terrans were right? What if the order and stability the compact provided was not worth the price of freedom? He began to quietly re-examine the contracts his own people had signed, the gifts they had received. For the first time, he started to look for the chains. The tribunal began. It was a panel of 5 judges from the most powerful species in the Concord, all of them with deep economic ties to the Gilded Compact. The chamber was packed with dignitaries and legal scholars from across the galaxy. The air crackled with anticipation. Valerius's lawyers presented their case first. They argued that the Mirror Ledger was an illegal act of piracy, a violation of the Compact's sovereign rights. They painted Rostova as a rogue commander, a zealot who had overstepped her authority and threatened the stability of the galactic economy. Their arguments were slick, polished, and backed by centuries of legal precedent. They were building a fortress of law around their client, a fortress that seemed impregnable. The weight of history was on their side. When it was Rostova's turn to speak, she did not address the judges directly. She turned to the assembled gallery, to the hundreds of beings who had come to witness this historic moment. She spoke not of legal theory, but of fundamental rights. She told the story of Aurora Nova, the story of a people saved only to be enslaved. She held up the child's drawing, its simple, stark image more powerful than any legal brief. The Gilded Compact speaks of contracts, she said, her voice echoing through the silent chamber. I speak of conscience. They speak of profit. I speak of people. She had turned the tribunal into a public inquiry, the very thing the Compact feared most. She was not just arguing a case, she was starting a revolution. A public ledger is more than numbers. It is a moral accounting. The judges were visibly uncomfortable. They were used to the rarefied air of high legal theory, not the messy emotional world of human morality. Rostova's appeal to conscience was a move they had not anticipated. It bypassed their legal arguments and went straight to the heart of the matter. The gallery was captivated, hanging on her every word. The live broadcast carried her message to billions across the galaxy. She was winning not by out-lawyering the Compact, but by outmaneuvering them, by changing the very nature of the game. She had turned their own system against them, using the public forum they controlled to expose their own hypocrisy. The mirror she held up was now reflecting the entire Concord. Desperate, Valerius's lead counsel tried to interrupt, to object, to regain control of the narrative. But the damage was done. Rostova had seized the moral high ground, and she was not giving it up. She concluded her speech with a simple, powerful question. What is the purpose of the law, if not to protect the weak from the strong? If the Concord sanctifies the chains of Aurora Nova, then it becomes not a guardian of justice, but a partner in oppression. The question hung in the air, an indictment of the entire system. The judges had no answer. They were trapped, forced to choose between their political allegiances and their public duty. Whatever they decided, the galaxy would be watching. The precedent lock was about to be set. Ledger. Rostova sent a final silent command. Project the mirror ledger data. Show them the numbers. Show them the theft. The main screen behind the judges flickered to life, displaying the stark, undeniable accounting of the Compact's exploitation. The flow of credits, the disparity between aid given and wealth taken, was laid bare for all to see. It was a weapon of pure, unassailable fact, a digital spear aimed at the heart of the Compact's lies. The numbers did not lie. They did not have an agenda. They simply were. And they were damning. The court of galactic opinion had all the evidence it needed. The count was final. The lead judge, a being of immense age and prestige, finally spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. He could not ignore the evidence before him. He could not ignore the will of the galaxy that Rostova had so skillfully mobilized. The tribunal finds that the practice of gratitude mandates, as defined and implemented by the Gilded Compact, constitutes a form of predatory economic coercion. It was a stunning rebuke, a landmark ruling that would reshape the galactic landscape for centuries to come. The fortress of law that the Compact had built for itself had been breached. The victory was not just for Aurora Nova, but for every world that had ever suffered under the weight of a gilded chain. Justice had found its voice, and it spoke with a human accent. The chamber erupted. The representatives of smaller client species openly wept with relief. Valerius and his legal team sat in stunned silence, their empire of paper crumbling around them. Rostova stood still, a calm center in the storm of emotion. She had done it. She had won. Not with phasers or torpedoes, but with the truth, a calculator, and a deep-seated refusal to accept that the law was only for the powerful. She had held up a mirror, and the reflection had shattered the illusion of the Compact's benevolence forever. This was the human way of war, not to destroy the enemy, but to make them irrelevant, to show their methods to be as empty as their promises. The ledger was now the law. The immediate aftermath was a torrent of chaotic data. Congratulations flooded the comms from independent worlds. Threats veiled and overt arrived from corporations aligned with the Gilded Compact. On the bridge of the just ledger, the victory felt fragile, a thin sheet of ice over a deep, cold ocean. Rostova stood with her officers, the adrenaline of the tribunal slowly giving way to a profound sense of exhaustion and a dawning awareness of the new, dangerous path they had carved. They had not just won a case. They had declared war on an entire system of power. The galaxy would never see them as simple observers again. "They are already moving against us," Corbin reported, his station alive with encrypted traffic. "The Compact is liquidating its assets in the cradle net, but not in a panic. It's orderly, coordinated." Rostova looked at the flowcharts on the main screen. The movement of capital was too precise, too strategic for a simple retreat. It was a repositioning of forces on a new battlefield. They had lost the legal war, so they were preparing for an economic one. "They are not running," she said quietly. "They are reloading." Jian Li nodded in agreement. "They will try to make an example of Aurora Nova, to prove that a world cannot survive without their benevolence. The true test was not in winning the verdict, but in making it stick." Ledger, the ship's mind, added its cool, synthesized voice to the analysis. "Commander, I project a 94% probability that the Compact will attempt to destabilize Aurora Nova's economy within the next 3 planetary rotations. The initial return of funds from the mirror ledger will create a temporary surplus, a perfect vector for targeted inflationary attacks." The AI's prediction was a chilling confirmation of their fears. The Compact would turn the very instrument of their liberation into a weapon against them. A poisoned gift was their specialty. "We won the argument, but now we must win the peace." The victory was a cost in itself, for it bound them to the fate of this world. On Aurora Nova, the news of the tribunal's decision was met with euphoric celebration. For the first time in generations, the people felt like the masters of their own destiny. Anya Petrova, the farmer whose testimony had been so crucial, gathered her family around a bonfire. They sang old songs of earth, songs of freedom and hope. The first payment from the mirror ledger had arrived, a wave of prosperity that washed over the planet. Debts were paid, storefronts were repainted, and for a brief shining moment, the future seemed limitless. But in the bustling city markets, the price of grain had inexplicably doubled overnight. No one understood why. The gratitude of freedom was quickly being replaced by the anxiety of uncertainty. Rostova ordered the Just Ledger to take up a high orbital station over Aurora Nova. They were no longer just witnesses. They were guardians. Ledger, she commanded, I want a real-time economic audit of the entire planet. Monitor every transaction, every shipment, every price fluctuation. Cross-reference it with the Compact's known corporate assets and shell companies. The ship's powerful sensors, once focused on legal and military threats, were now turned to the subtle, complex world of interstellar commerce. The AI's consciousness delved into the planetary data net, its logical processes a fine-toothed comb sifting through mountains of information. The battlefield had changed, and they had to adapt. The ledger they kept now was one of supply and demand. The data that flowed back was alarming. The Compact, through a labyrinth of intermediaries, was buying up essential commodities in neighboring systems and holding them off the market, creating artificial scarcity. Simultaneously, they were flooding Aurora Nova's markets with their newly returned currency, devaluing the local credit. It was a classic pincer movement, an economic siege designed to create chaos and panic. They were making the colonists feel the pain of their freedom. A cage made of gold is still a cage, but a world of chaos begs for a cage. The Compact was counting on it. They're trying to engineer a famine, Lieutenant Lee said, her voice tight with anger, to starve them into submission. Then they'll sweep in with another aid package and a new, more ironclad contract. It was a diabolical plan, a perfect reflection of the Compact's insidious philosophy. They did not need warships when they had leverage. They didn't need to conquer a people when they could make them beg for a master. Rostova's face was set like stone. She had underestimated their depravity. This was not business. This was cruelty. They want to teach the galaxy a lesson, she said. That defiance has a price. We will teach them a different lesson. Humanity remembers the cost of hunger all too well. The command deck of the Just Ledger transformed into an economic war room. Rostova and her team worked around the clock, analyzing data streams, modeling market trends, and searching for a way to counter the Compact's invisible siege. The AI ledger became their primary weapon. Its ability to process vast amounts of data and predict outcomes was the only thing standing between Aurora Nova and total economic collapse. But every countermeasure they devised seemed to be a temporary fix, a finger in a dike that was about to burst. The Compact's financial resources were simply too vast. They could bleed Aurora Nova dry without feeling a thing. During a late-night strategy session, the AI presented a stark choice. Commander, the most efficient solution is to assume direct economic control of Aurora Nova. We can impose price controls, ration essential goods, and manage all off-world trade. This would stabilize the economy and neutralize the Compact's attack. Rostova stared at the proposal on the main screen. It was logical. It was efficient. It was a perfect calculated solution. And it was exactly what the Gilded Compact would have done. She would be replacing their collar with one of her own, a benevolent dictatorship in the name of security. The mirror of her own methods was a terrifying thing to behold. No, she said the word cutting through the quiet hum of the bridge. We will not. We did not free these people only to become their new wardens. The AI responded without emotion. Commander, the alternative is a high probability of systemic collapse, mass starvation, and civil unrest. The colonists are not equipped to withstand this level of sophisticated economic warfare. Rostova's moral line was in direct conflict with the AI's cold calculus. This was the heart of the problem, the test she had known was coming. It was not enough to be right. She had to be wise. True freedom is the freedom to fail, but she could not let them fail. She had to find a third path. A teacher's hand guides, it does not command. She turned to her team, her eyes alight with a new idea born from the crucible of her dilemma. The compact's power comes from its centralized control. They are the hub, and everyone else is a spoke on their wheel. We will not build a new wheel. We will build a net. The concept was simple but revolutionary. We will create a decentralized peer-to-peer economic network. The Cradle Net. We will link Aurora Nova directly to other independent worlds, to our own Terran markets. All transactions will be recorded on a transparent, unhackable public ledger, a blockchain for interstellar trade. It was a system without a center, a network that could not be controlled by any single entity. The antidote to a corrupt system is a transparent one. The plan was audacious. It required not just technology, but trust. They would have to teach the colonists of Aurora Nova and the leaders of other fledgling worlds how to use this new system. They would have to convince them to abandon the familiar corrupt pathways of compact-controlled trade and embrace a new, untried model. It was a monumental undertaking, but it was the only way. The only way to truly defeat the compact was to offer the galaxy something better. We will not just break their system, we will make it obsolete. A grizzled freight captain, who had spent his life hauling cargo for compact-affiliated guilds, listened to the Terran proposal on a secure channel. He was a pragmatist, a man who believed in profit margins and docking schedules, not grand ideals. But he had seen firsthand how the compact squeezed every last credit out of independent worlds. The idea of a transparent ledger of direct trade with no middlemen taking their cut was appealing. It was risky. The compact would blacklist anyone who joined. But the potential rewards, a fair price for his work, a chance to be his own master. He decided to take the risk. He would be the first to fly under the banner of the Cradle Net. The implementation began. Rostova dispatched Jian Li and a team of economic and technical experts to the surface of Aurora Nova. They didn't arrive as conquerors or saviors, but as teachers. They set up workshops in town halls and farming collectives explaining the principles of the Cradle Net. They installed terminals, trained local administrators, and helped businesses make their first transactions on the new network. It was a slow, painstaking process. There was suspicion and fear to overcome. The colonists had been ruled by the compact for so long, the idea of true economic autonomy was almost frightening. But Li and her team were patient. They showed them the ledger, the transparent flow of goods and credits. They showed them the power of a system built on trust, not control. A bond freely made is stronger than any chain. The compact watched these developments with a mixture of contempt and disbelief. They saw it as a fool's errand, an idealistic fantasy that would collapse under its own weight. They intensified their economic attacks, trying to crush the fledgling network before it could take root. But the decentralized nature of the Cradle Net made it resilient. When the compact choked off one supply line, another would open. When they tried to manipulate the price of one commodity, the transparent ledger would instantly expose their actions, allowing the network to adjust. They were fighting a ghost, a system with no head to cut off. The harder they squeezed, the more the net expanded. Their power was a hammer, but they were facing a river. Ambassador Valerius, now in disgrace, and recalled by his superiors, watched the failure of his corporation's strategy from a gilded prison of his own making. He had been stripped of his titles and his authority, left with nothing but his bitterness. He saw the reports of the Cradle Net's success of world after world petitioning to join the new Terran-sponsored economic alliance. Everything he had built, everything he believed in, was being dismantled by a single stubborn human commander and her ridiculous ideals. In a final desperate act of spite, he used his lingering security clearances to access a hidden back door in the original terraforming systems the compact had installed on Aurora Nova. a system that controlled the planet's seismic stabilizers. If he could not have the world, no one would. On the just ledger, an alarm blared through the quiet hum of the bridge. Commander Corbin shouted, his face pale. "I'm detecting a massive energy surge in the planetary seismic stabilization network. It's a cascading failure protocol. The whole system is set to overload." Ledger's voice was grim. "The failsafe is designed to look like a natural disaster. The resulting earthquakes will devastate the planet's infrastructure. The projected death toll is in the millions." Rostova's blood ran cold. It was Valerius. A final murderous tantrum from a broken tyrant. He was going to burn the entire world down just to prove a point. The gratitude of callers is the gratitude of slaves, and a slave who escapes must be punished. There was no time to stop the overload from the planet's surface. The controls were locked, the sequence irreversible. Ledger. Rostova commanded, her mind racing. Can we use our own systems to counteract it? Can we beam power to the stabilizers to create a counter-frequency? The AI's calculations flowed across the screen, a maelstrom of physics and engineering. Theoretically, yes, but it will require us to divert all power from our shields and weapon systems. We will be completely vulnerable. Corbin looked at her, his expression resolute. It's our only chance. Rostova didn't hesitate. Do it. All power to the main deflector. Target the primary stabilization nodes. Let's show them what a real aid package looks like. The human moral line had been crossed, and the response would be absolute. The just ledger trembled as its energy was rerouted, its mighty engines groaning under the strain. A brilliant beam of pure energy, not of destruction, but of stability, shot from the ship's main deflector dish and lanced down into the atmosphere of Aurora Nova. It was a delicate, impossibly complex operation, like performing surgery with a thunderbolt. The AI's consciousness was merged with the energy beam, making trillions of micro-adjustments per second, fighting against the cascading failure that Valerius had unleashed. On the surface, the ground shook violently, then began to still. The catastrophe had been averted. The cost of victory was a ship left defenseless, its heart poured out to save the world below. The Compact's leadership, monitoring the situation from a safe distance, was stunned. They had not anticipated such a move. They had expected the Terrans to protect themselves, to let the planet burn, and use the disaster as propaganda. The idea of sacrificing one's own safety for the sake of another was a foreign concept, a variable their cold calculations had never accounted for. Valerius's rogue act and the Terrans' selfless response were broadcast across the galactic network. The Compact's last shred of credibility vanished. They were not just predators, they were monsters. Valerius's signal was traced, and his final pathetic act of malice was exposed for all to see. The mirror of justice had shown them their final, ugly truth. In the aftermath, the cradle net solidified. The dramatic rescue of Aurora Nova was the ultimate proof of humanity's commitment. Worlds flocked to join the new alliance, eager to escape the Compact's predatory grasp and embrace a system built on mutual respect and transparent accounting. The Gilded Compact, facing a galactic boycott and internal collapse, was forced to the negotiating table. They had been defeated not by force of arms, but by the force of a better idea wielded with unwavering conviction. Their empire, built on the fine print of contracts, had been undone by the bold print of a single moral stand. The law had been their sword, but the ledger had become humanity's shield. Rostova stood on her bridge, watching as the final entry was made on the public galactic record. The screen before her displayed the text, the culmination of all their struggle. The light from the entry blinked a steady pulse of confirmation that cast a cool blue glow across her face before dimming to a soft, permanent white. The public ledger entry, blinking, confirmed. She looked out at the stars. at the endless possibilities of the void. Her fight was over, but the work had just begun. The cradle net was a promise, not a guarantee. It would require constant vigilance, constant effort to keep it fair and free. True strength, she mused, was not in the power to command, but in the wisdom to empower. You do not teach a person to be free by holding their hand. You give them the tools to build their own future and the trust to use them wisely. Gratitude is the harvest of a seed you plant, not a tax you levy. A debt freely paid is a bond. A debt forced is a cage.